Welcome to Stroke Forward. My name is Marcia Moran. For the next 40 minutes or so, we are going to talk about things that stroke survivors, or any brain injury survivor, deals with. If you look at me today, you probably don't see a person who had a stroke, but I feel it. My body functions differently. Do I think I will get back to 100%? Yes, because to think differently is to admit defeat. We will talk to all sorts of people who have been there, from survivors to caretakers to doctors, nurses, therapists, friends, and family who have seen us at our weakest. They have cheered us with their victories, no matter how large or how small. How did we get here? That's what this show is going to tell you. Rebecca Kamen, sculptor and lecturer of the intersections of art and science, seeks the truth through observation. Her artwork is informed by wide-ranging research into cosmology, history, philosophy, and connecting common threads that flow across various science fields to capture and reimagine what the scientists see. She has investigated scientific rare books and manuscripts at the libraries of the American Philosophical Society, the Chemical Heritage Foundation, and the Cajal Institute in Madrid, utilizing these significant scientific collections as a catalyst in the creation of her work. Kamen has researched the collaborative pieces at the Center for Astrophysics at Harvard University, the Cajal Institute in Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Rochester Institute of Technology, and the National Institutes of Health. Selected as a Salzburg Global Seminar Fellow in 2015, she was invited to Austria to present her work as part of a seminar titled The Neuroscience of Art: What are the Sources of Creativity and Innovation? Ms. Kamen has exhibited and lectured both nationally and international, including China, Hong Kong, Korea, Austria, Italy, Egypt, Spain, Australia, and Singapore. She has been the recipient of a Virginia Museum of Fine Arts Professional Fellowship and received many more accolades.
Got it.
I'm delighted to introduce Rebecca Kamen to the show. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. It's spring, and I live in Philadelphia. We've had a lot of rain, which means that the flowers are blooming and the birds are just having a field day. So it always, to me, spring is always about renewal. And I think after coming off of what we've all come off of with the pandemic, that this is just a real revelation at this moment.
So actually, this is really different for me. Usually I talk to stroke survivors or doctors or somebody else in the healthcare field.
Mm-hmm.
And this is different because you're an artist. And I think it's really interesting because we met about the time you started, well, maybe you talked about Cajal earlier, but I had never heard of him before you talked to me. So tell me about your inspiration for Cajal.
Well, it's a really fascinating story. Back in 2010, which is when you and I actually met, I was awarded a professorship from the Commonwealth of Virginia as a faculty member at Northern Virginia Community College. And the professorship was a 2-year funded research grant. And what I was researching were the intersections of art and science, which was something I was very interested in. My artwork was starting to move in that direction. And I don't know how I landed up at National Institute of Health, but someone arranged for me to go up there and do my usual art science lecture without telling me who the audience was. So just imagine driving onto the campus of NIH and going into this building, not knowing a soul, and standing in front of a group of scientists and just doing my little spiel that I always did. And all of a sudden, at the end of it, a scientist came up to me and he said he was really inspired by my talk. And if I had time, could I go with him to his lab? He had something he wanted to show me that he thought would really inspire my work. I said, who turns down an offer like that? So we went to his lab, and it turns out that he was a retina specialist, and he really deals a lot with the dynamics of what goes on in the retina. And all of a sudden, we sat down in front of his desktop computer, which was fairly large, and he showed me this drawing, and my jaw dropped. It's like, wow, I need to know everything about what I'm looking at. And he said, this is probably one of the most famous neuroscientists, Santiago Ramón y Cajal. Well, being the curious person I am, I just started asking him all these questions. Next thing I know, I was probably there a good hour. And the more I asked him, the more images he would pull up of Cajal's. And it was like Alice in Wonderland. I kept falling down into the rabbit hole of possibility. So what happened was, I left there. I literally floated out of his office to my car and drove home. And I knew something had just shifted and changed because of just seeing these drawings. You have to realize I was a former art professor at Northern Virginia Community College, and I taught drawing for many, many years. So I love looking at drawings, and I would show students drawings all the time. But there was something about these drawings that were mesmerizing, inspiring, and I just, being the curious person I am, I just needed to go home and just immerse myself in Cajal and find out why his drawings spoke so deeply to me. And so what happened was, I had been working on a sculpture for many, many months. I just could not figure out how to resolve this sculpture. And, you know, this happens sometimes when you create artwork. So I just put it aside. But it was seeing that drawing of the retina that Jeff was so excited about, that I literally was able to go down in my studio and complete that sculpture after months of not knowing where it was going. And I was so excited about it. I took a photograph of it, sent it over to Jeff Diamond, who turned out later to be my mentor at NIH. And he, within 10 minutes, he said to me, what are you doing next week? I need to take you to lunch. We need to talk. I just sent it over as a little thank you. So who am I to turn down lunch and find out more about Cajal? So and it was ironic because I said to him, look, I'm going to be up at Harvard, the Center for Astrophysics, because my research is taking me up there. I'm doing a lecture, I'm doing research up there in astrophysics. So he said, as soon as you come back from Harvard, I want you to contact me. I really want to have lunch with you. So I thought, okay. So I went up to Harvard, did my thing, came back. We went out to lunch, and I'll never forget this. He said, I was so moved by your sculpture that I sent it on down the line to colleagues, and I want to know what you're doing this summer. And I said, well, probably just working in my studio. And he said, well, what would it take to bring you up to NIH? And I said, well, an invitation. If you invite me, I might consider it. So anyway, he invited me. He arranged for me to have a very generous fellowship, which I think was a first, last, and only. And it was interesting because they were in the process of building the new Porter Neuroscience Research Center. And that was an exciting time as a sculptor, is working in a space that they were in the process of reimagining or recreating. And so Jeff arranged this, and it was phenomenal. I mean, I literally got to come to NIH. I had my own little badge. And I got to be a scientist for the summer, along with being an artist. And it was really perfect, because if you know of Cajal's story is very interesting in that he always wanted to be an artist. And his father said, no way, no how is that going to happen. You need to be a doctor just like me. You need to be a scientist. And when we went to the Cajal Institute, one of the really extraordinary things, and let me just say, along with having an MFA in sculpture, I also have a master's degree in art education and have taught most of my adult life. Holding some of his early artwork was just astonishing to me, because there's this one painting he did, a landscape, when he was about 8 or 9 years old. And his ability to see and record what he did on that beautiful painting at such a young age was truly a gift. And I really believe, after looking at a lot of his drawings in his archive, that it was that ability to be able to do that literally enabled him to make the kinds of observations he did in his adult life as a neuroscientist and win the Nobel Prize. And it's interesting because they have done research of Nobel laureates in chemistry. And one of the things that they have found is that most people in the United States that have won a Nobel Prize in chemistry have reported a significant, quote, arts experience that has really planted the seeds for them to make the kinds of discoveries that they have. And that's one of the things that I've been researching over the years, is the impact that the arts have on science. And my background is extremely unique in that, my training is in art education, in sculpture, but I'm a very, very curious human being. And I'm also dyslexic. And so what's interesting about that is my brain is wired very differently. And it's one of the things that I research in my capacity right now as an artist in residence and visiting scholar at the University of Pennsylvania, is this notion of neurodiversity. And actually, I was working with a doctoral student this past year on researching how my brain processes information. And, what happens in my case, and it always has, reading is a real struggle for me. Yeah. When I read, I don't see words, I see images, which works really well for my career choice as an artist. And I think it really was Cajal's research that really opened up the field of neuroscience to all these extraordinary possibilities. And I think you see that in this notion of his discovery of the neuron, and the possibility that for a long time people thought that the brain was what we call reticulum, or this netting. Yep. But it was Cajal that really realized that no, these were individual cells that functioned individually. And so that just opened up the whole field of neuroscience and the study of the brain.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because if we had our neurons were a net, like you said, mm-hmm. For people like me who had a stroke, there probably wouldn't be anything that made plasticity possible. Mm-hmm. But since the neurons aren't connected, you could rewire them differently.
Exactly. It's the brain now, is our understanding at this moment, is just full of possibility. Yeah. And it's considered to be the most complex organ that we carry around. I love the fact that we carry it around on our shoulders. Yeah. And the more I study it, and I'm in a very unique position because of my again, my curiosity, I find that when I study the micro and macro complexity systems of the universe, which is obviously the macro, and then the micro, the brain, that there's so many metaphorical overlaps to how the dynamics of how they work. And I think one of the reasons scientists have been so generous with me in invitations to come and to research and lecture is because of the lens that I view science through. I mean, one of the things that I've observed about science is it tends to be extremely myopic. And it has to be. I mean, scientists get these grants and they're very specific about what money can be used for and for outcomes, where I come in and I challenge them and say, well, you know, I was just at Harvard and I was just looking at solar dynamics. And wow, you know, there seems to be a relationship with the dynamic of what happens with the sun's corona and then the coronavirus. And then I have microscopists during the pandemic in Dr. Fauci's lab saying, whoa, I never thought of that. And then when I show them these images, they're like blown away because they're never looking at the solar corona. They're just focused in this one little field. So I love what I get to do because I have this sort of encyclopedic brain that really, because I am dyslexic, allows me to see connections because of the way my brain is wired that most scientists don't get to see. So,
yeah. So in 2013, you went and lectured at the Cajal Institute and gave them an amazing gift, butterflies of the soul. Can you tell us about that?
There's this one quote that Cajal talks about where he refers to the brain as the butterflies of the soul. And well, the thing I love about Cajal is how poetic he was. And I think part of it was that artist side of him that his father tried to suppress, but it was so powerful. There was no way that train had left the station at age 8 and it was going forward with or without his father's blessing. That turned out to be an incredible gift because his gift was to be able to look at the human brain and write about it in the most poetic and metaphorical way. And for mere mortals like us who are not trained as scientists, it allows us to get just a little bit of an understanding of something that we all share in common. I mean, we all have a brain on our shoulders. And all of them function differently, and that's great. I mean, I'm spending some of my time now going around to schools and really inviting students who are challenged in school to just realize what a blessing it is that we all perceive the world in a different way. And then I show them what's possible when you look through a different lens through the development of my work and my life journey. And it's amazing how students are very appreciative, you know, of realizing that it's okay to be neurodiverse. But to get back to your question, sorry, welcome to my
okay.
Sometimes you have to just reel me in like a fishing line. What happened was, when I looked at his work, I was trying to understand this metaphor of butterflies of the soul, and I discovered this beautiful drawing he did of what are called Purkinje cells. And Purkinje cells are these cells in the brain that literally look like a butterfly. And they're interesting in that they I mean, when you see them, it's like, wow, these really do look like a butterfly. So one of the first sculptures I did when I was invited to be in residence up at in the neuroscience building at NIH or in the program was a piece called Butterflies of the Soul. And literally it had a big, what looked like a root ball, which represented the reticulum. And then coming out through the center of it was what we call a pyramidal cell, or one of these individual cells. And then coming off of those were these forms that looked like butterflies that were actually patterned after Purkinje cells. And so what I wanted to do when we were invited to come to the Cajal Institute was a gesture of gratitude. And so what I did was I created an additional butterfly form, and I took it to my framer and I said, can you frame this so it looks like it's in a case that you would put an actual butterfly in, to study it? And so he did a great job, and it was small enough I could tuck it into my bag to cross the ocean. And then Jeff said to me, what happened was I did my lecture first to these neuroscientists at the Cajal Institute, and then Jeff was going to do his, and he said, under no circumstance are you to present that butterfly until I'm done with my lecture. And so I promised him, I said, yes, it's not going to be a problem. So I did mine, he did his. And then after he did his, he said, Rebecca has a presentation that she wants to do. And so anyway, then I gifted it to the curator, Wanda Carlos. And it was amazing. I remember opening it up and showing it, and people, and you and Marcia, you videoed it. You could hear people go, I mean, it was like, I love the fact that I could create something that had, it was tangentially related to what they do, but it made them stop. The art made them stop and pause and realize that an artist had been so inspired by some neuroscience component, and here was this beautiful object that was being gifted to them, inspired by their research or Cajal's research. And that meant so much to me. And just looking at the faces of the people from the stage when I unwrapped this little gift was really just quite memorable.
Yeah. So as you said before, Cajal is considered the father of modern neuroscience.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the first to describe the structure of the nervous system with exquisite precision. What was it like when you first saw his drawings when we entered the Institute?
Well, it's interesting, as an artist, obviously who teaches and shows reproductions of work and have my whole career, there's nothing like holding or seeing an original. We were quite, it was quite a gift to be able to hold one of these drawings. And I work a lot with scientific special collections all over the place. I mean, I actually got to hold Einstein's brain, or a histological slide of Einstein's brain. And what's always interesting to me when I'm holding something that precious, who else held that? And in Cajal's world, he obviously drew it, and he held it and, examined it and looked at it. So that's the things that I love about working in scientific special collections. I spend a lot of time in scientific special collections all over the world. And these objects really speak to me in very profound ways. Sometimes it's really hard for me to explain it to other people, but I try to, because a lot of my research is in scientific special collections. What people don't realize, before the advent of the camera, scientists had to be artists. It's the only way they could capture their observations. So you see these beautiful paintings and drawings done in the 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th century and 19th century, not done by artists, but by scientists. The other thing that really was very powerful to me is having an opportunity when we were there to look through what's called a teaching microscope. So it's a microscope with two optics. And one of the things I really wanted to see before we left was an actual Goji stain slide, one of Cajal's slides. And that was really exciting to me. When I was looking at this through the microscope, through the optics of the microscope, I was imagining what Cajal was experiencing when he was seeing these beautiful lines. And what was interesting was he had this gift and ability to be able to look through the microscope for a while, then sit down and actually draw what he remembered. And what was so incredible about him, he was so intuitive, just like artists are really intuitive, creative people. And I put scientists in that category as well as creative types, is his ability to look at something. And in one case, I believe it was a drawing of the hippocampus. He was able to, he had tiny little arrows to indicate the electrical charge, the way the electrical charge was, which he noted in the drawing. And guess what? He was spot on. Which is really pretty amazing because it was at a time where we didn't have the instrumentation to really check that at that moment. But he was so intuitive with his skills to observe. And I really believe those seeds were really planted when he was young, when he was a child and really loved to draw. And I say this to scientists all the time, is that when, in this day and age, what scientists do, they look in the microscope, they take a photograph, sometimes with an iPhone, a smartphone, and then they move on to the next thing. It's a very different experience when you're looking through a microscope and you're physically drawing it, because that process of drawing is a process that enables you to process what you're understanding about what you're seeing. It's sort of a disservice that we don't have scientists drawing. Now, I realize, everything is one and done and moving on to the next thing, but I think you can learn a lot by savoring what you're looking at. It's like a really fine glass of wine. If you gulp it down, you miss the subtleties of what makes it so extraordinary. And the same thing's true when you're looking through the microscope, and that's why when I was teaching college and working with science students, occasionally I would encourage them to draw. And I think they realized it was a very, very different experience of capture, capture of, observation and insight.
I took down that precious, you're talking about the drawings that were so precious to you. I remember seeing things that were drawn on the back of envelopes, if I am not mistaken.
I think most brilliant people sometimes will be at a bar, usually, or a restaurant, with their friends, and an idea comes up. And so what do? You write it on a napkin. I mean, I think Frank Gehry, there was a beautiful drawing he did on a napkin when he was out with some friends for a building that got to be built somewhere. And I mean, I think creative people just, when the muse hits, you have to record it, in some way. And drawing has always been a traditional way of capture.
Yeah. So it's interesting to me that Cajal's father didn't really want him to draw.
Oh, no way. No, no. Yeah.
But his drawing actually led him to really be a remarkable man.
Oh, to make extraordinary discoveries. Yeah, it was his medium that it really enabled him to make the discoveries he did, including the most significant one, the neuron, which landed him a Nobel Prize. I mean,
Yeah.
totally significant.
So is it my imagination, or when he looked through the microscope, could he see everything, or is some of it intuition?
Creative people, whether you're an artist, whether you're in any kind of creative problem-solving field, and artists aren't the only ones, or musicians who are creative, intuition is something really significant.
What do you want people to know that I didn't ask you about?
Know about what? Can you be a little
Well,
more?
Cajal, of course.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that I discovered about Cajal that I think is really interesting, this was a personal discovery and something that I share when I lecture about Cajal, which I've been fortunate to do in a lot of different audiences, from art therapists to neuroscientists to even astrophysicists, is the fact that the significance of photography to Cajal. And you know, this might not seem like a big deal in this day and age, because we all live with smartphones, and we all think like, God, how do we ever live without them?
Yeah.
But back then, when, you know, Cajal was in his prime, he was very interested in photography. And not only was he interested in photography, he was interested in stereographic photography. And that blew me away, because if you've ever had an experience with stereographic photography, it's very much the way scientists are trained to look at things. So for instance, a lot of times when you're looking at something microscopic, they'll have two of the same image. And if you can look at the form in the center, your eye optically will make it look 3D. So I love the fact that scientists had to develop a technique that would enable them to be able to look at something three-dimensionally. And obviously now that's not an issue, but it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. So this is where it gets really interesting. On our trip, I noticed that he had these beautiful stereographic cameras, and he was really into photography. So what was so interesting, when you look at something stereographically, you're not looking at it as just flat lines, you're looking at it dimensionally. And I really believe it was his fascination with photography and this specific type of stereographic photography that enabled him to see what he was looking at, not as flat lines, but looking at it very dimensionally. And I really, really believe that what made a huge difference in his sense of discovery.
Yep. He was amazing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And you know how amazing he is, because now they have socks with his photographs, you know, photographs of his drawings. I have a scarf, I believe of Purkinje cells, of these really large Purkinje cells. And he's become this icon, as well as his discoveries. I mean, it's really amazing, like a pop icon.
We have those books that we bought that are, I think it's this big, and yeah, and it's written in Spanish, so I can't understand a word of it.
But a picture's worth 1,000 words, so that's the good thing.
It is, and it's beautiful.
I don't speak Spanish either, but I don't need to. I just look at those drawings, and they speak to me so deeply and so profoundly. I mean, they still, after all these years, which is 10 years, they still inspire my work, and they inspire my lectures. I spend a lot of time when I'm invited to come and lecture, talking about the significance of Cajal on the development of my work. So he's been a huge inspiration in the development of my work.
Yeah, beautiful. So thank you for taking time to talk with me and my guest,
My pleasure.
Rebecca.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to see what the future brings to both of us.
I second that. And thank you so much for your support of the work that I do, Bridging Art and Science. It's really meant a great deal. And you're one of the few people that really knew me right at the beginning of that journey and really could see the full development of it. And I'm full of gratitude for your support over the years and your continued enthusiasm and just continued support of what I do. So thank you so much.